Hello. Today I'm back with another video. And so today I'm going to be talking about a movie that I've been really enjoying recently. I've watched it like 20 times in a row now. And so I thought it warranted kind of a proper talk. Cool. So the movie is The Count of Monte Cristo, but it is in French, and so it's Le Count de Monte Cristo. And it is a movie that came out 2 years ago, 2024. It stars Pierre Niney, and it is basically the latest in a long line of kind of the of adaptations of The Count of Monte Cristo, right? So The Count of Monte Cristo, if you don't know, is a 19th century novel, French novel by this guy named Alexandre Dumas. He's slightly more famous for writing The Three Musketeers, right? But basically, The Count of Monte Cristo and The Three Musketeers are basically Dumas' like kind of two masterpieces, and he's kind of considered the national author of France, right? In many ways, he's kind of like uh, he's on par with like Voltaire and Molière and people like that. Cool. So the Count of Monte Cristo is a very famous kind of story. So I'll quickly summarize the plot itself first, and then kind of go over why I think the movie is so good. So the plot itself. So the plot takes place in early 1800s France, which is around where Dumas when Dumas lived. And the main character is this guy named Edmond Dantes, right? Edmond Dantes, and he is a sailor on a ship called the Pharaon. And and he's basically living the dream life, right? So he's very young. He's 19 years old. He's about to get married to this woman named Mercedes, who is like the most beautiful woman in the entire town. He's just about to be made captain of the Pharaoh, right? So he's about to be made captain. He's gonna get a promotion. He's gonna get married to the love of his life. Um, and so it kind of starts. So Dante's life starts at a very high point. But then later on, but then obviously, if you're kind of at that kind of high point, then you start to attract very kind of negative and jealous kind of energy, and so this comes in the form of three people. So the book starts off with the pharaoh, the ship, rolling into the harbor at Marseille, which is the biggest harbor in France. Right, so the ship is kind of rolling into the harbor, and along the way, Dantes has gotten a letter, right? Right, so while the ship was kind of on its journey back to France, on its way, they visited an island very briefly, and so Dantes has has been asked to has been asked to deliver a letter, or I believe somebody sneaks a letter into his personal belongings, right? So that's just important context. Um, yeah, cool. Okay. So anyway, so the ship kind of comes in, and he gets the news at this point that he is up for the promotion of to be the pharaoh. Um, uh, uh, Not the pharaoh, the captain of the pharaoh, because the old captain is retiring. And the first villain in this kind of story is this guy named Danglars, right? So Danglars is a fellow crewmate on the Pharaon, but he is a very jealous crewmate, and he also wants the captain's job, but he is not willing to accept basically that Dantes might get the job over him. Um, Yeah, so Danglars is very jealous of Dantes, and he has kind of a vested interest against him. The second villain is this guy named Fernand Mondego, right? Fernand Mondego, as we'll call him Fernand from now on. So Fernand is in love with Mercedes, the fiance of Dantes. So Fernand is actually Mercedes' cousin, and they are both Catalan, or basically Spanish. Um, uh, that's not a That's not meant to be a political statement, by the way. Just yeah. Um, so Fernand is kind of his romantic rival, but Mercedes does not like Fernand at all. And so Fernand kind of keeps trying to push himself onto Mercedes, but but Mercedes is not feeling it at all. So Fernand is the second villain that hates Dantes for obvious reasons. Um, and then so so Dantes comes back on the shore. He delivers the news to Mercedes that he's going to be made captain, and so his life is basically great at this point. It's a great life. Um, but then he suddenly gets arrested. So at the depending on the adaptation, at either at the wedding or at the play or at the kind of the congratulatory feast that the young couple are gonna kind of the young couple have right before getting married. A bunch of policemen come in and arrest Dantes. And here we meet the third villain of the story, right? The third villain of the story is this guy named Villefort, right? Villefort. And so Villefort is a prosecutor, and he has big political ambitions, right? So he's a very ambitious man, and he has confiscated the letter that somebody put inside Dantes' belongings, right? So it's kind of implied, I believe, that Danglars put them in Dantes' belongings. But anyway, so the reason this is important is because Villefort discovers the letter, and he discovers that it is a letter from Napoleon. And at this point, Napoleon has kind of been deposed as emperor, and so anybody that's associated with Napoleon is kind of political poison at this point, right? So you're not supposed to even know or speak of Napoleon's name, but this is a letter from Napoleon to one of his secret agents, right? And so this is a really big deal. But the big thing is that this secret agent is Villefort's father, Noirtier de Villefort. And so obviously, if you're a man like Villefort and you have really big ambitions when it comes to kind of wanting to make it as a prosecutor and so forth, this is a very, very bad turn of events. You know what I mean? Right? Because basically that means that your father is implicated with the biggest villain in political history at this point. And so it is a very kind of bad look for you to be associated with Napoleon in any way. And so Villefort, he burns the letter, right, as a way to kind of exonerate himself. But technically, since Dantes, he swears that he hasn't heard anybody, he hasn't told anybody about this letter, but he has read the letter, and has he read the letter? I don't know, but he knows that it's for this guy named Noirtier. And so this is a very, very bad situation for him. And so Villefort pretends to let him go, but then he eventually traps him in, or imprisons him in a very famous kind of island fortress called the Chateau d'If, right? Chateau d'If. Chateau meaning castle, and d'If means like of if, right? So If, of If, right? So it's an island, basically like Alcatraz. So he is trapped in Chateau d'If. So the next 14 years, Dantes is trapped in the Chateau d'If. And so the Count of Monte Cristo overall, I should have mentioned this, is a revenge story. So it is kind of the prototypical revenge story in all of Western literature. There's a lot of kind of like a lot of kind of tropes that are associated with revenge stories are kind of come from this, right? But like a big thing is like, oh, like you were unjustly accused of something by your enemies. You go to a very bad place, in this case prison. You train very hard and like you kind of like grind for a really long time, and then you eventually come back and then you defeat your enemies. But anyway, so Dantes is in the Chateau d'If for 14 years. And he considers starving himself to death, right? Because obviously, if you're in solitary confinement for 14 years, right, you just become very depressed and you don't really know what to do. And so he stops eating the food that the kind of the prison wardens keep giving him, right? So he's just kind of sitting in the corner and just kind of starving, right? So he's almost like dead at this point. But then he hears a brick moving, and a person's head pops up from the ground, and it turns out to be this like old man. And so this old man is named Abbe Faria, and he's been digging a hole for years, trying to get out, trying to escape from the prison. But it turns out that what he thought was the end of the prison, or like the outside of the prison, just turned out to be the cell of Dantes, right? So he kind of failed to go to prison, but now finally Dantes kind of has hope, and so he starts eating again, and he finally has a friend, basically. And so Abbe Ferreira is a very old religious kind of figure, and he's a very well learned figure, right? So he spends the next few years teaching Dantes everything, right? He teaches him foreign languages, teaches him how to fight, teaches him kind of all sorts of like survival skills and so forth. And basically, um, yeah, basically, this is Dante's kind of training arc, right? So he forms himself in like the way of kind of a very learned figure, even though he's in prison. And so, and also, Abifria tells him that he know his plans after they escape eventually, right, are to go to the island of Monte Cristo, right, where there is a giant hidden treasure. So Abifria knows about this giant hidden treasure on the island of Monte Cristo, and so he's trying, and so his goal is to escape from this prison, right? So kind of dig a hole out of this prison, and then go to the island of Monte Cristo, and then get all that money. And basically, he says, half of that money is yours now, Dantes, right? So he has kind of adopted Dantes as his protege, and so now he kind of thinks of him as kind of a second son, and so he is gonna be kind of guiding Dantes through the journey from now on. But then, unfortunately, Abifreya, so while they're digging the hole to kind of escape, Abifreya dies of a tunnel kind of collapse. And so he dies, but just before he dies, he tells Dantes of a plan B, right? So plan A was digging their way out of the prison, but plan B is right. So if you are since Abifria will be inside like a body bag, right? So when a prisoner dies, right, they put them inside a body bag and then drag them out and throw them into the ocean. Um, while that body bag is being prepared, he tells Dantes to put himself inside the body bag to escape. And so that's exactly what he does. And it's a very dramatic moment, but basically, while they're not looking, right, so after they put up the Abe's body inside a body bag, Dantes kind of sneaks in there. He doesn't make any noise, and then the prison wards carry the body bag and throw it into the ocean outside. I believe it's the Mediterranean. And it's a very kind of tense moment because the bag is obviously like tied up and it's locked, and so Dantes needs to. And so after the body bag is thrown into the water, Dantes actually needs to untie it and like kind of squirm his way out and swim to the land. But that's basically what he ends up doing. And so he successfully actually escapes, and he goes to the island of Monte Cristo, where he does find the treasure. And so now Dantes is extremely, extremely rich. Um, and then he also kind of through various people, he kind of catches up on like what's been going on in the world since his disappearance. And the biggest and so this is kind of where part one of the novel and the film ends, and part two begins. Okay, part two is a very long time later. I believe it's 5 years later, something like that. But a series of updates. So Mercedes, Dantes's fiance, has gotten married to Fernand, his romantic rival. All right, so she didn't really want to, but basically with Dantes gone, she figured he was dead, and so she did get married to Fernand, who has been pursuing her for a very long time. So that's that. Danglars, the jealous crewmate who kind of sold him out, he is extremely rich. He's basically a banker, and he's an extremely rich man. And Villefort, the royal prosecutor whose dad was a Napoleonic agent and who basically ended up sending Dantes to prison. Villefort has become the royal prosecutor, and so he's basically like the kind of like the Secretary of Justice. Is that a thing? Secretary of Justice? It's the Department of Justice. Chief Prosecutor. Prosecutor General. Sorry, Prosecutor General of the U.S. Right. So that's kind of like right. So all that is to say that he's basically like in the highest position available. Cool. So all the villains, the quote unquote villains of the story, have basically gotten everything they wanted at this point, right? Right, like they're in like the highest positions that they could possibly be, and so here starts Dantes's extremely convoluted revenge plot, to kind of to exact his perfect revenge on all of them. And so I won't go into all that here. But basically, yeah, he kind of figures out all their psychological kind of needs and wants and things like that, and then he pinpoint kind of like targets all of them, right? So, for example, like Danglars, he goes bankrupt. Um, Fernand and Mercedes, they have a son, and also they have a son, right? So he kind of like pretends to adopt the son as like a protege, but then he slowly makes Fernand lose everything, and he slowly reveals that he is Dantes. Villefort, he cares a lot about his reputation, but then he uh, has all these kind of schemes to kind of reveal like his skeletons in the closet. He also makes his wife secretly poison all of his children, right? Because he kind of basically convinces her that like her child, right? Because this is his second wife, so like her child won't get a lot of the inheritance if she doesn't kind of kill all the other children that Beaufort has. So one by one, all of his children die. Um, yeah, a lot of stuff like that. A lot of stuff like that. So just a lot of kind of intrigue in that way. Um, yeah, so just a lot of kind of poisonings, betrayals, very typical kind of like revenge story kind of stuff. Um, and so Danglars goes bankrupt. Uh, Danglars goes bankrupt. Fernand, the romantic rival, he kills himself, and Villefort just goes completely insane. And so that's kind of how it ends. But then at the end, at the very end, the Dantes does have this moment where he basically says like, "Oh, I've been trying to kind of like control my own life, but I'm not gonna try to do that anymore, and I kind of surrender to Jesus Christ, things like that." But obviously, he's already done it all, right? So like, what's the point of saying that at this point? Oh, by the way, it's very important. I forgot to mention. Dantes has renamed himself to the Count of Monte Cristo. Um, so you can just buy like the Count ship, right? So being a Count isn't necessarily a hereditary title at this point, and so you can just buy being a Count. And so since he became rich on the island of Monte Cristo, he is called the Count of Monte Cristo. Um, yeah. So that's pretty much it. So that's the story of the Count of Monte Cristo. So I'll go very briefly on the adaptations. So I really like this latest adaptation. Number one, because it was very high budget and it made everything seem very kind of like bright and colorful and things like that. It was very kind of well paced. Right. So the movie is 3 hours long, but it doesn't feel 3 hours long. It feels like an hour and a half movie, just because like no moment is wasted and all the dialogue is just so crisp. All the dialogue is like so well placed that I'm just still kind of in awe of, yeah, just how well placed and kind of strategic every single point of dialogue is, which is really great. Um, it, it is not, and then also compared to other adaptations, I feel like I think kind of deviates from the story in the least offensive ways, right? So I mean, obviously, every adaptation deviates from the story a lot because the original novel is so long. But for example, in the 2002 adaptation, which was made in the U.S., right? So it's a Hollywood movie starring Jim Caviezel. It turns out that it's a very American adaptation, right? So there's no kind of moral ambiguity. So for example, Fernand and Mercedes, right? So Dantes' kind of rival and former fiance, they have a son named Albert, and in pretty much every adaptation and in the original novel, Albert actually is Fernand and Mercedes' son, right? But in the 2002 American adaptation, they retconned that to say that Albert is actually um, Dantes' son, right? So right, so um, like the good guy kind of gets the girl after all, which I don't agree with, like very fundamentally. I think it's a very cop out kind of way of saying, oh, everything was all great all along. Also, in the American adaptations, here's another point. In the American adaptations, all the bad guys are just so cartoonishly evil, right? That it becomes very black and white. And so, I mean, obviously these guys are evil. Obviously these guys are the bad guys, and you need to kind of destroy them. The really cool thing about this adaptation, which I think stayed a little bit more faithful to the original novel, was this like all of the quote unquote bad guys seem like very respectable public men, right? So they're not obviously evil kind of like maniacal villains, right? Fernand is a very respectable military man, and he's very respected, and you can tell why he's respected. He has a very good sense of humor. He's very personable and things like that. Um, Villefort and Danglars too, right? Like all of them, like they represent their respective kind of areas, right? So Danglars represents money, Fernand is a military officer, and Villefort is a royal prosecutor, right? So it's like law, military, like finance, things like that, right? So it's very highly respected fields. And in the latest adaptation, in the latest 2024 adaptation, you can really tell these are very highly respected men in their field, and you can tell why. They are very personable, they're very sociable, they are very good at their jobs, you can say. And so, yes, they have kind of their dark sides, and they're willing to throw a man in prison for 14 years just because it's inconvenient for them. But they are actually very, very respectable and good figures, like to the outside public, right? So I really respect the nuance in that way. Um, Cool. I was gonna talk about all the adaptations, but I think that's pretty much all we really need to cover for now, right? Like there's a 1960 adaptation. There's like a BBC TV adaptation. There are adaptations like dating back to the 1920s, right? Because it's such like an iconic novel. But I just want to say that the latest Le Count of Monte Cristo 2024 is an amazing, amazing film. It is based on an even more amazing novel, but the novel can be a bit long and a bit time consuming, I'd say. I would recommend please just read please just watch the film. It is available on pretty much every streaming platform. I actually bought it on YouTube. It's $20. It's kind of expensive, but I've watched it like 20 times in a row, and I'm gonna watch it more. I would say it was worth it. Cool. All right. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.